The red emergency lights flashed across the white walls of the Galactic Council station like angry red eyes blinking in the darkness. Taemin stood in front of the massive window watching the stars while sipping his morning coffee when the alarm started screaming. Everyone in the human section of the station jumped up from their desks and ran toward the main communication center. Taemin was not like other diplomats. He was tall and thin with kind eyes that seemed to see everything around him. He had spent 5 years learning how to talk with alien species, and he was very good at it, but today felt different. The alarm was not the usual soft beep that meant a small problem. This was the loud, scary sound that meant people were going to die. He ran down the long hallway past other humans who looked just as worried as he felt. His black diplomatic uniform felt heavy on his shoulders as he pushed through the crowd of people trying to get to the emergency meeting. The metal floors made loud noises under everyone's feet as they hurried toward the main council chamber. When Taemin reached the huge circular room, he saw something that made his stomach feel sick. On the giant screen that covered most of the wall there was a beautiful silver spaceship floating in the black space around it were 15 smaller ships that looked like they were made for fighting. The small ships had big guns pointing at the silver ship, and Taemin knew that meant trouble. Ambassador Valterra stood in the center of the room. Her body was made of blue crystal that usually glowed with calm light, but today the light was jumping and flickering like she was very scared. She was twice as tall as any human, and when she spoke her voice sounded like music played on broken glass. The silver ship is called Stellar Dream, she said to the room full of worried diplomats from many different planets. Inside that ship are 3,000 people from 47 different species. They are all prisoners. Now the pirates who captured them are called the Vorthic Syndicate, and they are very dangerous. Taemin felt his heart beating faster. 3,000 people was a lot of lives depending on what happened in this room. He looked around and saw diplomats from all over the galaxy. The Altarians looked like giant blue birds, and they were very smart, but they only cared about facts and numbers. The Xanthari looked like floating jellyfish, and they felt emotions very strongly. The Corvans looked almost human, but they could read minds. We have tried everything, Valterra continued, and her crystal body was getting dimmer, which meant she was getting more upset. The pirates want us to free their leader from prison and give them 50 million credits. They say they will kill 10 prisoners every hour until we do what they want. Our best negotiators have already tried to talk to them. She pointed to the Altarian section. The Altarians tried to make a deal with them using logic and math, but the pirates got angry and said the Altarians were treating them like computers instead of living beings. Then she pointed to the Xanthari. The Xanthari tried to make the pirates feel sorry for the prisoners, but the pirates said feeling sorry was for weak species. Even the Corvans tried to use their mind-reading powers, but the pirates have mental shields, and they said trying to read their minds was the worst insult possible. Valterra looked directly at Taemin and the other humans. Now we need Taemin walked closer to the big screen studying the formation of the pirate ships. They were arranged in a pattern that would let them escape quickly, but also attack the prisoner ship from many directions at once. It was smart and dangerous. The pirates were not stupid. His colleague Jiwoo was already working at her computer pulling up files about the Vorthic pirates. She was shorter than Taemin, with quick fingers that moved across her keyboard like she was playing music. Her screen showed pictures and information about the pirate leaders. Why do you think humans can succeed where others have failed? Taemin asked Valterra, even though he was pretty sure he knew the answer, because your species does something that no other species in the galaxy can do. Valterra replied, you change the way you think and talk depending on who you are talking to. The Altarians always use logic. The Xanthari always use emotions. The Corvans always try to read minds, but humans somehow become what the other person needs them to be. Taemin nodded slowly. He had seen this in his training. Human diplomats were taught to study other species and learn their ways of thinking. It was like learning to speak different languages, but instead of words, it was learning different ways of seeing the world. The first prisoner execution is supposed to happen in 6 hours, Valterra said, and her voice was getting quieter. 6 hours to save 10 lives, and then 6 more hours to save 10 more lives until either the pirates get what they want or all 3,000 prisoners are dead. Taemin looked at the screen again where the silver cruise ship hung in space. Like a beautiful bird caught in a trap, he thought about the 3,000 people inside. Men and women and children from dozens of different worlds who had been taking a vacation among the stars and now were facing death because of something they had nothing to do with. The other human diplomats were gathering around him now. There was Haijin, who understood how different species thought and felt. There was Dongsu, who knew about alien cultures and customs, and there was Jiwoo, who could find information about anyone or anything in the galaxy computer systems. "We will help," Taemin said to Velterra, "but we need complete access to all information about the Vorthek pirates, and we need to be able to talk to them directly without any interference from other species." Velterra nodded quickly. "Anything you need, the entire galaxy is watching this situation. If we cannot save those people, it will be the biggest failure in galactic council history." As Taemin walked toward the communication center with his team, he felt the weight of those 3,000 lives pressing down on him like a heavy blanket, but he also felt something else. He felt the curious, excited feeling he always got when facing a puzzle that seemed impossible to solve. The other species in the galaxy were smarter than humans. The Altarians could solve math problems that would take humans years to figure out. The Zenthari could feel emotions so strongly they could predict what someone would do before they did it. The Corvins could read thoughts directly from other minds, but humans had something different. Humans could look at any situation and find a way to make it work. They could take the best parts of logic and emotion and mind reading and mix them all together into something new, something that worked when nothing else would. As they reached the communication room, Taemin took a deep breath and prepared to do what humans did best. He prepared to understand someone who seemed impossible to understand and find a way to build a bridge between two completely different ways of seeing the world. The pirates were waiting and time was running out, but Taemin smiled just a little because he knew that humans had never met a problem they could not solve if they just took the time to really understand what the problem actually was. The real work was about to begin. The human diplomatic ship hummed quietly as it moved through space toward the location where the pirates held their prisoners. Taemin walked into the special communication room, where his team was already working hard to understand their enemy. The room was filled with floating holographic screens showing pictures and information about the Vorthek pirate. Shaijin sat at the main table with her hands moving through the air as she controlled the holographic displays. She was the team's expert on how different alien minds worked, and she had been studying the Vorthak for the past 2 hours. Her face was serious as she pointed to different images and data files. "These are not ordinary space pirates," she said to the team. "Look at this information. The Vorthak used to have their own planets and star system. They were a proud warrior people who ruled 12 worlds for thousands of years. But 300 years ago, something terrible happened to them." She waved her hand and the hologram changed to show a star map with red marks over several planets. Their home star began to die, and their planets became too hot to live on. The Galactic Council promised to help them find new worlds, but the help never came. The Vorthak became refugees floating through space in old ships trying to survive. Dongsu was working at another station where he studied alien cultures and languages. He had been listening to recorded communications from the pirate ship. The harsh, growling voices of the Vorthak filled the room as he played back their conversations. The universal translator was working, but Dongsu knew that understanding words was not the same as understanding meaning. The other alien species made big mistakes when they tried to talk to these pirates, he said while pointing to his analysis charts. The Altarians treated this like a business deal. They offered to trade money and prisoners like they were buying and selling things at a market. But the Vorthak are warriors who care about honor and respect, not just profit. Jiwo was at her computer station pulling up more detailed files about Vorthak culture and history. She had found classified government documents that most diplomats never got to see. Her fingers moved quickly across her keyboard as she searched through decades of reports and studies. "Look at this," she said excitedly. "The Zenthari tried to make the pirates feel guilty about holding innocent people prisoner. They kept talking about how the prisoners had families who were worried about them, but to the Vorthak this sounded like the Zenthari thought they were weak and emotional. The Vorthak believe that strong people do what they have to do, even when it is hard." Taemin stood in the center of the room absorbing all the information his team was gathering. He had learned that good diplomacy started with really understanding who you were talking to. Every species in the galaxy had their own way of seeing the world and their own ideas about what was important. The Corvans made the worst mistake of all. Dongsu continued. They tried to read the Vorthak minds without permission in Vorthak culture. That is considered the most terrible insult you can give someone. It means you think they are too stupid or weak to speak for themselves. The pirates probably wanted to start shooting right then. He Jin pulled up psychological profiles of known Vorthak leaders. The holographic display showed brain scans and behavioral patterns that revealed how these aliens thought and made decisions. What makes humans different from all the other species, she asked, even though she already knew the answer. We adapt, Taemin replied. We change our approach based on who we are talking to. The Altarians always use logic because that is how their minds work. The Xanthari always use emotions because they feel everything very strongly. The Corvans always try mental contact because they are natural telepaths, but humans study the other person and figure out what approach will work best for a Themji. Wu activated the long-range communicator that would let them talk directly to the pirate ship. The main screen flickered and filled with static as the connection was established. Everyone in the room held their breath as they waited to see their enemy for the first time. The screen cleared and showed the bridge of the pirate ship. It was dark and filled with strange alien technology that looked like it had been built for war. A figure stepped into view and Taemin felt his stomach tighten. Captain Groktar was huge even for a Vorthak. His skin was dark green and covered with scars from old battles. His yellow eyes glowed like fire in the dim light of his ship. Behind the captain, Taemin could see some of the human prisoners. They looked scared and tired, huddled together in a corner of the bridge. Their clothes were torn and dirty, but they seemed to be unharmed for now. The sight of his own species being held captive made Taemin angry, but he forced himself to stay calm. So the council sends humans to speak with Groktar, the pirate captain said in a voice that sounded like rocks grinding together. The universal translator made his words understandable, but it could not hide the contempt and anger in his tone. Your species is young and soft and weak. Why should warriors of the Vorthak listen to children who have barely learned to walk among the stars? Most diplomats would have been insulted by these words. They would have defended humanity or demanded respect or threatened the captain with consequences. But Taemin had studied the psychological profiles. He knew that the captain was testing him to see how he would react instead of getting angry or defensive. Taemin did something that surprised everyone watching. He bowed his head slightly. It was not a bow of submission, but a bow of acknowledgement, like one warrior recognizing another. The gesture was small, but it carried important meaning. Captain Groktar, I come not as a representative of the weak, but as one warrior speaking to another, he said in a calm, respectful voice. The Vorthak are known throughout the galaxy for their honor in battle and their strength in the face of terrible hardship. I seek to understand what has driven such respected warriors to this action. The pirate captain blinked his yellow eyes in surprise. He had clearly expected the human to either beg for mercy or make threats. Instead, this strange young diplomat was treating him with respect and calling him a warrior rather than a criminal. Jin was monitoring the captain's biological signals through the ship's sensors. She could see his heart rate and stress levels changing as Taemin spoke. The captain's anger levels were going down while his attention and interest were going up. It was working. Dongsu quickly pulled up more information about Vorthak honor codes and cultural values. He sent the data directly to Taemin's communication implant, so the diplomat would have the information he needed without having to look away from the screen. You speak pretty words, human, but words are wind, Captain. Groktar replied, but his voice had changed slightly. It was still harsh and threatening, but there was a note of curiosity that had not been there before. Your people live in comfortable worlds while mine scrape survival from the cold void between stars. What could you possibly understand about our struggles? This was the crucial moment. Taemin knew that his next words could either build a bridge between them or destroy any chance of saving the prisoners. He thought about everything his team had learned about Vorthak culture and history. He thought about 300 years of wandering through space without a home. He thought about proud warriors reduced to piracy just to keep their people alive. You are right, Captain, he said, and this admission sent shock waves through the listening council members. I cannot truly understand the pain of losing one's homeworld, but I can recognize the strength it takes to keep your people together for 3 centuries without a home. That is not the action of pirates, that is the action of a leader who refuses to let his people fade into nothing. For the first time since the conversation began, Captain Groktar was completely silent. The silence that filled the communication room was so heavy that everyone could feel it pressing down on them. Captain Groktar stared at Taemin through the screen, his yellow eyes wide with something that looked like shock. The other Vorthak pirates on the bridge had stopped what they were doing and turned to listen to the conversation. Their captain had been called many things over the years, but never a leader who refused to let his people fade into nothing. Taemin could see that his words had hit something deep inside the pirate captain, but he knew he had to be very careful now. One wrong word could destroy everything he had built. In these few minutes he glanced at his team and saw Hyjin nodding slightly. Her monitoring equipment showed that the captain's stress levels were dropping while his emotional engagement was rising. The displacement of the Vorthak from their ancestral worlds was a tragedy that the galaxy has never properly acknowledged. Taemin continued, his voice steady and filled with genuine respect. 300 years of wandering through space, being treated as outcasts and criminals when once your people ruled a system of 12 worlds with honor and strength. Captain Groktar leaned forward in his command chair, his scarred hands gripping the armrests so tightly that the metal creaked. You speak of things your databases tell you, human, he growled. But there was less anger in his voice than before. Pretty words mean nothing when your people live in comfortable worlds while mine scrape survival from the void between dead starstamen. Did something then that made every diplomat watching gasp in surprise. He admitted that the captain was right. You are absolutely correct, Captain, he said. Without hesitation, I cannot truly understand the pain of losing one's homeworld. I have never had to watch my children go hungry because there was no food. I have never had to make the choice between honor and survival. The admission sent ripples of shock through the Galactic Council members who were monitoring the conversation. Most species would never admit weakness or ignorance to an enemy, but humans understood that sometimes admitting what you did not know was the first step toward real understanding. But Captain Taemin continued, I can recognize strength when I see it, and keeping your people together for 3 centuries without losing hope, without giving up your identity, without becoming something less than what you were. That takes a kind of strength that most beings in this galaxy could never imagine. Hyjin was watching her instruments with growing excitement. The biometric readings from Captain Groktar were showing changes she had never seen before in a hostile negotiation. His heart rate was stabilizing, his stress hormones were decreasing, and most importantly, his brain activity was shifting from the patterns of anger and suspicion to the patterns of careful listening. Meanwhile, Yuwu was working frantically at her computer station, pulling up more detailed information about Vorthak culture and history. She had found something important in the classified files, and as she quickly sent the information to Taemin's neural implant, the data showed that the Vorthak had a cultural concept called Valthara, which roughly translated as honor through recognition. It was not enough for the Vorthak to be strong or brave or honorable. Their strength had to be seen and acknowledged by others to have real meaning. This was why they had become so angry when other species treated them as common criminals instead of displaced warriors. Captain Taemin said, leaning forward slightly, your demand for the release of your captured Lieutenant Sekhmoth, this is not really about ransom money, is it? This is about the fact that he was taken during a supply run to feed your people's children, and the Galactic Patrol labeled him a common thief rather than a warrior doing what was necessary for his family's survival. The effect of these words was immediate and dramatic. Captain Groktar went completely still, his breathing stopped, and his yellow eyes went wide. The other Vorthak pirates on the bridge turned to stare at their captain, their own faces showing surprise and something that might have been hope. How do you know of Sekhmoth's mission? The captain asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The council records list him only as a raider who attacked a supply convoy because humans understand that sometimes good people are forced to do difficult things for the right reasons. Taemin replied, his voice gentle but firm. And we understand that being misunderstood by those in power does not make you evil, it makes you desperate. Dongsu had been monitoring the conversation while cross-referencing Vorthak cultural databases. He found something else important and quickly added it to the conversation. Captain, in Vorthak tradition, there is a concept called Morthak Velan, the honor debt between those who truly see each other. When one being truly recognizes another's struggle and sacrifice, a bond of mutual respect is formed. Captain Groktar eyes widened even more. You know, the old words, he said with amazement. How is this possible? Your species has only been in space for a few decades. Because humans believe that every culture has wisdom worth learning, Taman answered. And because we recognize that the Vorthak are not pirates by choice but survivors by necessity, you did not choose this life. Captain, it was forced upon you by a galaxy that forgot its promises and abandoned your people when they needed help most. The captain was quiet for a long time, his scarred hands opening and closing as he struggled with emotions he had not felt in years. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a different quality, less hostile and more uncertain. The soft beings on this vessel, he said slowly, they are not warriors. They are simply travelers seeking pleasure among the stars. They came on this journey to see beautiful things and visit peaceful worlds. They do not deserve to pay for the galaxy's sins against my people, no. They do not. Taman agreed immediately, just as your people did not deserve to lose their worlds, and just as Sekmoth did not deserve to be labeled a common thief when he was trying to feed hungry children. But Captain, you have something now that you did not have before. What is that? Human, you have witnesses, Taman said with growing excitement. 3,000 beings from dozens of different species who will return to their worlds with a story, not a story of Vorthak pirates who terrorized innocent travelers, but a story of a displaced people led by an honorable captain who chose mercy when he could have chosen vengeance. Throughout the Galactic Council chambers, every being present had stopped talking. The usually chattering delegates had fallen silent as they began to understand something profound about human negotiation. They were not just trying to solve the immediate problem, they were trying to transform the entire nature of the conflict. Captain Groktar looked at the human prisoners huddled behind him, then back at the screen where Taman waited patiently for his response. The captain was beginning to see possibilities he had not imagined when this day began, possibilities that could change everything for his people. Conversation had reached a turning point and everyone could feel it. The change in Captain Groktar was like watching ice melt in warm sunlight. His rigid posture of defiance slowly softened into something more complex. The anger that had burned in his yellow eyes for so long was being replaced by something the captain had not felt in many years, hope mixed with deep uncertainty. Your lieutenant has been in galactic prison for 14 months. Gui said, her voice gentle but clear as she read from the classified files on her screen. 14 months away from his family, labeled as a common criminal when the supply run he conducted fed 67 Vorthak children for 2 whole weeks. The words hit Captain Groktar like physical blows. He closed his eyes and his scarred hands trembled slightly behind him. The other Vorthak crew members were listening intently to every word. Some of them had families too. Some of them had made similar desperate choices to keep their people alive. Jin watched her monitoring equipment with growing amazement. The emotional patterns she was seeing were unlike anything in her experience. The captain was not just listening to the words, he was feeling them. The barriers he had built around his heart were cracking and falling away piece by piece. But it was not just the captain who was changing. The other Vorthak pirates visible on the screen were also showing signs of emotional shift. Their hostile readiness was giving way to something else, curious engagement and the beginnings of trust. They were starting to see the humans not as enemies but as beings who might actually understand their pain. Your people have been treated like criminals for 3 centuries. Taman continued, but you are not criminals. You are refugees. You are survivors. You are parents trying to feed your children and leaders trying to keep your culture alive in a galaxy that has forgotten you. Exis Dong Su had been working frantically to understand more about Vorthak culture, and he found something that made his heart race with excitement. Captain, he said, stepping closer to the communication screen, there is something else we know about your people. The Vorthak have a tradition called the Great Remembering, where your people gather once a year to remember your lost homeworlds and honor those who died in the displacement. Captain Groktar head snapped up in surprise. How could you possibly know about the Great Remembering? That ceremony is sacred to our people. We have not spoken of it to outsiders for 200 years because We looked beyond the official reports and the criminal records, Taemin replied. We looked for the real story of your people. We found fragments of Vorthak poetry and songs hidden in cultural databases. We found the testimonies of the few survivors who were willing to speak to historians. We found the truth that the galaxy has been trying to ignore. The captain stood up from his command chair and began pacing back and forth, his mind clearly racing with thoughts and possibilities. The other pirates watched him with growing excitement as they realized that something important was happening, something that could change their lives forever. You said, I have witnesses, the captain said, stopping in front of the screen. 3,000 beings who will return to their worlds with a new story. What kind of story could possibly change anything? The galaxy has ignored our suffering for 3 centuries. What makes you think they will listen now? Because this time the story will not be told by politicians or historians or bureaucrats, Taemin replied with growing confidence. It will be told by ordinary people who were there, who saw with their own eyes that the Vorthak are not monsters but displaced persons fighting for survival. It will be told by passengers who went on a pleasure cruise and instead witnessed an act of mercy that could have been an act of revenge. Jin was monitoring not just the captain now, but the emotional responses of the visible crew members. What she saw amazed her. The stress levels of everyone on the pirate ship were dropping as hope began to replace desperation. The transformation was happening not just in their leader, but in all of them. Captain Groktar stopped pacing and looked directly at Taemin through the screen. There was something different about his expression, now something vulnerable that had not been there before. My people have been wanderers for so long that many have forgotten what it means to be trusted, he said quietly. If the Council offers us worlds, how do we know this is not another trap, another way to gather us together for elimination? This was the crucial moment, and Taemin knew it. Other species would have offered guarantees, legal contracts, and binding agreements. But humans understood that trust could not be built with documents and signatures. Trust could only be built with actions and shared risk. Because I'm going to come with you, Taemin said simply, and the words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. I am going to live among your people for the first year as a cultural liaison and as a guarantee of the Council's good faith. If the Council betrays this agreement, they betray one of their own diplomats as well. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Captain Groktar stared at the human diplomat with an expression of complete shock. The other pirates looked at each other with wide eyes, unable to believe what they had just heard. Even Taemin's own team members gasped at the unexpected offer. You would do this? The captain asked, his voice rough with emotion. You would leave your comfortable world to live among the stars with outcasts and criminals. Captain, 3 hours ago, you were prepared to fight the entire galaxy to protect your people and secure justice for your lieutenant. Taemin replied, that is not the action of a criminal, that is the action of a leader. I would be honored to serve alongside the barriers that had stood between the two species. For centuries were finally breaking down in the space of a few hours. A human diplomat had accomplished what no other species had even attempted. He had looked past the surface of the conflict to find the pain and honor that lay underneath. Captain Groktar walked closer to the communication screen until his scarred face filled the display. When he spoke, his voice was different than it had been at the beginning of the conversation. It was the voice of a leader who had found unexpected hope. In the darkest moment, human diplomat Taemin, he said formally, if your council is willing to negotiate in good faith, if they are willing to recognize my people as displaced persons rather than criminals, if they are willing to help us find a place where our children can grow up with dignity, then perhaps we can find a way forward that honors everyone. The breakthrough had happened, but Taemin knew that the hardest work was still ahead. They had built a bridge of understanding, but now they had to walk across it together and convince an entire galaxy to change the way it saw the Vorthak people. Time was still running out and 3,000 lives still hung in the balance. But for the first time since the crisis began, there was real hope that everyone might survive this day with their honor intact. What happened next would change the way every species in the galaxy thought about conflict resolution. Instead of simply negotiating for the release of the hostages, Taemin proposed something that had never been attempted in the history of galactic diplomacy, a 3-way agreement that would address not just the immediate crisis but the centuries-old injustice that had created Captain Groktar Taman said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. I propose we turn this moment of crisis into a moment of justice. The galaxy has ignored the Vorthek displacement for 300 years, but that ends today right here. Right now, working with incredible speed, Jiwoo and Dongsu began coordinating with the Galactic Council to draft an agreement unlike any that had ever been written. Jiwoo's fingers flew across her keyboard as she pulled up legal frameworks and precedents, while Dongsu consulted cultural databases to make sure every detail respected Vorthek traditions and honor codes. The hostages would be released unharmed and immediately, but in exchange the Galactic Council would officially recognize the Vorthek as displaced persons rather than pirates. They would be granted territorial rights in the resource-rich Outer Rim systems, and most importantly, the cases of all Vorthek currently imprisoned for survival crimes would be reviewed, and many would be released with full honor. Shijin continued monitoring the emotional states of both the Vorthek crew and the human hostages, and she noticed something remarkable as the conversation progressed and the possibility of a real solution emerged. The stress levels of the prisoners began to decrease. Even though they could not understand the alien language being spoken, they could sense the change in their captors' mood and behavior. The Vorthek pirates were no longer treating the prisoners as enemies to be guarded, but as witnesses to something historic. The pirates began offering the hostages food and water, and some even tried to communicate using hand gestures and simple words. The transformation was visible and profound. Captain Groktar listened to the terms of the proposed agreement with growing amazement, but there was still doubt in his yellow eyes. There is one more thing, he said, and for the first time there was vulnerability in his voice that everyone could hear. My people have been wanderers for so long that many have forgotten what it means to be trusted by others. If the Council offers us worlds, how do we know this is not another trap, another way to gather us together so they can eliminate us all at once? This was the moment when Taman would either succeed completely or fail catastrophically. Other galactic species would have offered guarantees, written contracts, and legal protections. But humans understood that real trust could not be built with pieces of paper. Real trust could only be built through shared risk and personal commitment. Because I am going to come with you, Taman repeated his earlier promise, but now he expanded on it. I am going to live among your people for the first year as a cultural liaison and as a living guarantee of the Council's good faith. If the Council betrays this agreement, they betray one of their own people as well. But more than that, I want to learn from you. I want to help tell your story to the galaxy so that what happened to the Vorthek never happens to any species again. The silence that followed was different from the earlier silences. It was not the silence of shock or confusion, but the silence of people trying to absorb something too large and too wonderful to believe. Captain Groktar looked at his crew members and saw hope in their eyes. For the first time in years you would do this, the captain asked, his voice breaking slightly. You would leave your home and your family to live among people you have never met, to guarantee a promise made by politicians you do not control. Captain Taman replied, 3 hours ago you were prepared to fight the entire galactic fleet to protect your people and secure justice for one imprisoned lieutenant. That is not the action of a pirate or a criminal. That is the action of a leader. I would be honored to serve alongside and learn from. 6 hours later, the luxury cruise ship Stellar Dream docked safely at Galactic Council Station. The 3,000 hostages walked down the boarding ramps, not as traumatized victims, but as witnesses to something they would remember and talk about for the rest of their lives. They had seen hatred transform into understanding and desperation transform into hope. Lieutenant Sekmoth was released from prison with full military honors and a formal apology from the Galactic Council. The charges against him were not just dropped, but expunged from all records. The Vorthak were granted a beautiful star system in the Outer Rim with 3 habitable planets and rich asteroid fields perfect for their mining and manufacturing traditions. But perhaps most importantly, every species in the galaxy learned something new about humans that day. They learned that human diplomacy was not based on superior technology or military strength or even superior intelligence. It was based on something far more powerful and far more rare, the ability to truly see other beings as they saw themselves. Captain Groktar stood on the bridge of his ship as it prepared to depart for the new Vorthek homeworlds. Beside him stood Taemin carrying a single bag with his personal belongings ready to begin a new chapter in his life. The captain looked at the human diplomat with something that had not existed between their species. For mutual respect and friendship, you know. Human, he said quietly, your people are very strange. Most species in the galaxy negotiate to win, but you negotiate to help. Taemin smiled as he looked out at the stars that would be his home for the next year. Maybe that is because we understand that the best victories are the ones where everyone wins something they need. Ambassador Veltara watched from the station as the Vorthic fleet departed carrying their new human friend toward their new homes. Her crystalline form glowed with a soft, contemplative light as she spoke to her aide. Perhaps we have been approaching conflicts all wrong for centuries. We negotiate to defeat our opponents, but humans negotiate to understand them, and in understanding they find solutions that none of U.S. could imagine. From that day forward, whenever a hostage situation or diplomatic crisis arose anywhere in the galaxy, the call went out, not for the most logical species or the most emotional or the most telepathically gifted. The call went out for humans because they alone had mastered the art of seeing through another being's eyes and finding the path forward that honored everyone's deepest needs and dreams. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the greatest strength was not the power to force others to submit, but the wisdom to help them find a way to stand up with dignity and hope. And in that lesson, humanity found its true place among the stars, not as conquerors or servants, but as the bridge builders who could connect any two hearts, no matter how different they seemed.